Dun, dun, dun. Okay, cool. I don't know why when you're recording, it all of a sudden like takes away that like green notation of what screen you're sharing. So can you all see this like scope is happening at 10:02? Can I get like a, yep, great, excellent. All right, cool. So we are going to spend the next like 50-ish minutes discussing this thing called scope. And scope for me feels very much like something that I can say a lot of words to you about scope, and you probably won't really fully understand everything that's happening in scope until you've broken a lot of code. So I'm just gonna like give you a heads up before we get started that by the end of this lesson, you are not going to be an expert on scope. You are going to be aware of scope, that it is a thing that might go wrong in your programs, in your code, and it's a thing that you might want to check when you get certain errors, okay? So just sort of like laying out the expectations here. So what do I mean when I say scope? Does anyone know or think they have a guess of what scope means in the term, in like the programming world when we're thinking about code? What does scope mean? Does anyone think they have a guess? I see Jennifer. Let's go with Jennifer.
What you have access to,
Cool.
and where you can get to it.
Yeah, where you can get to it. I love this. Scope is a way of defining what you have access to. So scope is like what you have access to, where you can get it. Scope is part of the rules that govern the way that Ruby will look for things as it executes code. So scope is what you have access to and when you have access to it. And this idea of like it, I'm talking about variables, methods, classes, objects, instances of objects. Basically anything that you're creating in programming is going to have some sort of scope. It's going to be available in some locations, on some lines, in some files, and not available in others. And that idea is referred to as scope. There are a few different kinds of scope that we're going to be talking about today. We'll talk about, we'll talk about global scope. We'll talk about class scope. We'll talk about method scope and block scope. And as we talk about these things, we'll also be referencing different variables as either local variables, really cannot type today, or instance variables. Can I hear from, let's see, who's someone that I maybe haven't heard from yet this morning? Have we heard from Regina today? Regardless, I would like to hear from Regina.
Okay, what would you like to know?
Regina, what is the difference, or what's one difference that you know of between local variables and instance variables? Or what makes instance variables noticeable?
So a local variable would be something, I know it's a smaller scope, like.
Cool.
I don't know if I have the words to describe it.
That's okay. What might it look like if I were going to declare a local variable?
Would it look like just a variable, like something equals something?
Something equals something. I like it.
Would that be local?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, great job. And then what would be an example of an instance variable, Regina?
Oh, I don't know if I know.
That's totally fine.
So it'd be an instance of, I
Trevor,
don't know if I know.
That's okay. Trevor also raised their hand. So Trevor, you wanna jump in?
Yeah, wouldn't an instance variable be something like part of a class? So it'd
Yeah, it
be
would be
within.
it would be part of a class. And let's say we're inside of a class right now. What visually, how can I like identify instance variables? What's special about them visually?
Well, they would need to be defined, correct?
They would need to be defined. So how might I define an instance variable?
Well, you would need to find. The wheels are turning.
Wheels are turning. I like it. If someone else has an idea, feel free to jump in. Katie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so we would define it with the @ symbol for an
Cool.
instance variable. So it'd be like @ something is equal to something.
Great, I love it.
Mhm.
Awesome. So I just want to make sure that we're clear. I'm going to be using, as we discuss these things, and I'd love for you all to practice using these words. When we talk about local variables, we're talking about this simple variable setup, something equals something. When we talk about instance variables, we're referring to these special variables, and we'll talk about what makes them special a little bit later, but these special variables that start with at something equals something. And these two things, I just want to, again, make sure that we're using these words, because as we talk about them, they're going to have or be impacted by different scopes. Okay, cool. Let me double check the chat, make sure there's nothing. Okay, great, excellent. All right, so I posted in the, oh, my Slack's not on this screen. I posted in your 2011 code help channel. Where did Slack go? The lesson plan for this. I'll just post it, I guess, in the copy. I'll post it in this chat as well. I'd like you to pull this lesson plan up. And what we're going to do for the first pretty good chunk of this lesson is I'm actually going to have you all work through some of the exploration pieces around scope on your own. As I said before, like I can say a lot of words to you, and this idea of scope is really something that I think is learned best by like practicing and playing around with these things. So in just a minute, I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. And what I'd like you to do, we're going to take a good chunk of time. I'd like you and your partner in your breakout room to work through these exploration pieces. So I believe that there's 4 explorations that sort of explore different types of scope. Yep, explorations 1 through 4. And what I'd like you to do is with your partner, work through these explorations. So it says for each example, copy and paste the code into a playground file and play around with it. See if you can guess what is going to happen when the code is run. Run the code, verify or see like, was my guess correct? Was it incorrect? And why or why not? So again, with your partner, I'm going to have you work through explorations 1 through 4. Each exploration has a link to some code examples that you can copy and paste into a practice.rb file. And you can, so just like copy this little bit, put it in a practice.rb file, and see if you can guess what will happen when you run that file. Run it and discuss what happened with your partner. After you work through the examples, each section also has a little like debrief. So definitely go ahead and read through these debrief pieces as well. And then I am going to be jumping around to the different breakout rooms, just kind of checking on folks, seeing if there's like any questions that come up. If you need me to jump into your room and I have not made it to your room yet, please post in the Slack code help channel what room number you are in. When you go into the room, it'll say like up at the top what room number you're in. And if you do that, I can jump in and help you out. So let me go ahead and create these rooms. While I'm creating them, if there are any questions, please go ahead, questions about what we're about to do, please go ahead and unmute and just ask those questions while I move some folks around real quick. I'm just making noises so you know I'm still here, and I like making noises. Oh, Mike is instructor, and now we've got one person all alone. Okay. The silence indicates to me that everyone knows what you're about to do. So I'm going to send you off. We are going to take about 15 minutes doing this. So let me actually put a timer on here so that I keep myself accountable. And we'll do 15 minutes. If I think that we need more time, I will readjust as necessary, but we'll start with 15 minutes and go forth, have fun. Hello.
I was going to say I'm in a room all by myself.
I know, I wasn't sure if you would want to be with a group of students or not, so I put you in here and then I was going to see
Oh, no worries.
if you
no worries.
wanted to make that choice.
Yeah, I'm happy to just sit in and listen in on some students if you want.
Okay, cool. And
Yeah.
I will send you out. I think I'm going to send you to. Oh, actually, I guess I have to leave this room to send you somewhere else. I'm going to leave and I'm going to send you somewhere.
No worries. Okay.
Okay, so I know some groups got all the way through, some groups were partway through. Not super important how far you got there, but the more important thing is really thinking about this idea of scope and thinking about, as I look through a block of code, do I know how Ruby is going to look through this block of code? Can I make some educated guesses on what's going to happen? And can I recognize that when things go wrong, I have a tool in my tool belt where I can try and figure out what's going on. So I want to touch on a few things that I sort of heard and noticed as I was popping around to the different rooms. I didn't make it to every room, but I think I got a couple things from enough rooms that I wanted to make sure the whole group hears. So what I'm going to do, let me go ahead and share my screen. Share. Ooh, I had too much coffee today. Got the caffeine jitters. All right, so let me move this so I can see y'all. Yep, gotcha. All right, cool. I am gonna grab from the lesson. I'm gonna grab this person class that's down near the bottom, and I'm gonna throw this into a Ruby file real quick. So one of the things that I noticed as I was sort of popping around to the different rooms is y'all were doing a great job of sort of reading through the code and trying to figure out, like, how is Ruby reading this? And you might not have been doing this like consciously, but I saw a lot of good discussion around, like, okay, well, this is defined here, and then we're calling it over here. Like, is that in the right order? Is that within scope? So I wanted to talk just a little bit about how Ruby parses through a file. In my head, I have, what is it, personified, anthropomorphized Ruby into Dora the Explorer. So in my head, Ruby is Dora, and the Ruby Dora has a little tool belt that she carries around. So I've made a lot of assumptions about Ruby, but this is just the way that I think of this. So apologies that I'm going to force this upon all of you. So if I am Ruby exploring this file, the way that I'm going to read and parse and execute this file is going to be generally from top to bottom. And I will do two different things as I'm reading through this file. I will learn new skills and I will execute those new skills. I will do those things. So as Ruby reads through this file, we start on line 1 and Ruby sees, okay, cool, I've got a class of person. Great, I'm going to put that person class in my tool belt. I know that there is a person class. Cool. In this person class, I've got a method for greeting. Cool, I know that a person should be able to respond to this method greeting. I'm going to put that in my tool belt. I see that I have a method for name. Great, I'm going to put that in my tool belt. So as I'm reading through this class, I'm learning new skills, new things that new objects that I have access to, new things that that object can do. Up to this point, me, Ruby, the explorer, has not done anything yet. I've just learned. I've just been exploring this environment. It's not until I get to line 11 that I actually start doing the things that I've learned about or using these tools that I've been collecting on this journey as I read down this file. So it's here on line 11 that I say, okay, great. Someone wants me, I've been given this task of creating a person and assigning that to a variable. So in order to determine if I can create a person, I need to look in my tool belt and see, like, do I know what a person is? Yep, I do. I saw that this person was defined as a class up above. So I learned that a person is a thing, and now I'm actually doing the activity of creating that person. And then I see that the next task is to call greeting on the person object. And so I'm going to, again, look in my tool belt and see, does that person that I know about know this idea of greeting? Does it know this method? So I'm referencing these things that I learned previously in order to execute code. Okay. What that means is, in this case, everything looks good. I learned above all of the things that I need to know in order to execute these lines of code. But what if someone, what if this like file has something like this in here? Person, actually, let's do this. Dog equals dog.new. If I'm Ruby reading through this code, everything's like all hunky-dory all the way through line 11. When I get to line 12, I see, okay, someone's asked me to perform this dog.new task. And I look in my tool belt and I don't know anything about dogs. I don't know what to do. This is where things start to go wonky. Similarly, if I comment this line out, if I have a file that does something like this, because Ruby reads from top to bottom, the first thing I'm asked to do is perform a task. And at this point, I look in my tool belt, and at this point on line 1, I know nothing about that person class. I will learn about it if I can get down to this point, but because on line 1, I know nothing about it, I'm stuck. I can go no further. Okay. So when you're writing your code, it's really important to remember how Ruby is looking through this file, how, in my mind, Dora the Explorer is learning and executing tasks. Any questions on this so far? Where's my participants thing? Oh no, where did you go? There you are. Okay, no one has their hand up. All right, cool. So that was sort of the first thing that I wanted to go over with everyone is this idea of like how Ruby is reading these files. The second thing that I wanted to mention, looking at my thing here. Okay, cool. So the other piece that I wanted to talk about, or one of the other pieces that I wanted to talk about was kind of a sort of a model for envisioning this idea of scope. So I think what I want to do, I think I want to just do a little bit of defining here. So when we think about all of these scopes that we were working on, let's see, how do I want to do this? I had a different thought in my head, and now I'm thinking I want to do something a little bit different. Yeah, this is what I want to do. Okay, so in those examples that we talked about, we went through different levels of scope, and I would say different levels of scope have different sort of rules and gotchas and like funky things about them. Generally, when we define a specific scope, whether that's class, method, or block, we are creating a box in which variables and methods live or are available to us. So as we create scope, I'm just gonna make this a little bit bigger. Each scope you could think of as a little bit of a box. And so our code is gonna have these little scope boxes all around. And these boxes generally are like have the same features. This is gonna get a little bit cerebral. If you lose me on this, that's okay. If you have questions, please raise your hand and ask them. But these boxes generally have the same shape in the sense that they have a start and an end, and they are boxes. But each different type of box has some interesting rules and exceptions to it. So let's talk about these in terms of boxes. And I think I want to start sort of at the like what I consider the smallest box, which is our block scope. And to talk about this, I'm going to grab an example from the lesson. Yep, we'll do this one. All right, cool. So with block scope, I want to make this a little bit prettier. There we go. So block scope is from do to end. These are sort of the like container points of our scope. So our block scope exists here. Okay. So inside of this box, we have access to any variables that are defined within the block. So we have access to this variable number and this variable greeting. So we can access, let's see, can access any variables defined within the block. Okay. The exception or the weird thing about block scope is we can also access any variables. Let me think about the way that I want to say this. We can also access any variables or methods that are available in the scope that is just above us. So can access any variables or methods that are in the scope above us. So what do I mean by above us? in this example right here, I've got two scopes happening. I have a block scope, and then that block scope is living within global scope. Okay. If I had a class with a method, and in that method I had a block, the scope just outside of that block would be the method that it was in, would be the method scope. Okay. So think about like whatever this block box is, if it's sitting in another box, I have access to any variables or methods that are in the block box and the next encasing block. Next encasing box. If this feels like, Megan, I have no idea what you're talking about, it's okay. Just bear with us for a second. Like I said, scope is a thing that we can say a lot of words about, and it's really not going to like get ingrained in us until we break a lot of things. So fun times ahead. Okay, cool. So that is block scope. The next sort of like level up that I sort of envision in my mental map of this is method scope. And our methods scope. Our method scope is from def to end. So if I grab a, let's see if I can get a good method example from here. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm going to go back to this person real quick. Okay, so our method scope is from def to end. So in this example here, I have two method scopes. I have a method scope in my greeting, and I've got a method for name, and each of these have their own scope. In a method similar to a block, we can access any variables defined within the block and any methods that are defined one level above, like one level outside. So similar to, yeah, let me actually just write this out. We can access any variables or methods defined within the method. Sorry, we can access any variables, this is what I'm gonna say. We can access any variables defined within the method. We can also access any methods defined in the scope above us. Okay, so in a method, we can access any variables defined within that method. So if I were going to create a variable for like speak text, in this method, I have access to this text argument. It's basically a placeholder variable that I've created. So I can do something with that text. I can also create new variables. So my pet is Niall. I have access to pet and text inside of this method. So that's this first piece here. I also have access to any methods defined in the next box up. So these methods are all inside of a class. So from each method, I can access any other methods that are in this class scope. So you see, I've got def greeting here, and greeting is going to reference name, which is this method down here. So methods from within a method, you can call other methods that are in that next level of scope up. Okay, so slight differences between block scope and method scope. This first piece is pretty much the same. I've got all the variables that I've defined within that scope. With a block, I can access variables or methods that are in the scope just above me. With a method, I can access any other methods that are defined in the scope just above me. Alexa, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, when you can access the methods and variables in the box just above you, does it matter if they're like ahead of you since Ruby reads top down, or you could access below you as well?
Great question. So remember that as Ruby is reading through this file, Ruby is either learning new things or doing things. And so as Ruby learns, Ruby is going to say, okay, I've got this class of person. Great. I've just learned that when someone uses this person class, I know what that is. Then it's going to learn, I've got this method name. Okay, great. Whenever anyone calls name, I can access it. I've got a method greeting. Great. Whenever anyone uses this method, I can access it. So in the learning phase of Ruby reading through this file, the order doesn't matter. I could have name first and then greeting, or I could have greeting first and then name, because as I'm learning about this class, I'm not executing any code. It's once I get down here that I start executing code. So if, this is what I'll say. Generally, when you're creating a class, the order is not going to matter very much, the order in which you define methods. But if I then try and just create a like a globally scoped method out here, geez, I cannot ask Ruby to execute this method until after it's been defined. So I couldn't say hello up here. Ruby doesn't know about it yet. But I could after I define it, have Ruby use that method. Does that answer your question, Alexa?
Yes, and then just to further clarify, so the very top method greeting, it references name, which is below it. So that would work since Ruby's first collecting the information and then executing.
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
As
got
Ruby
it.
collects information, Ruby's like, okay, cool. Person, got it. Greeting, I'll worry about what's inside of you later, but I know this method. Name, I'll worry about what's inside later, but I know this method. It's not until we actually tell Ruby to call this method that Ruby goes in and is like, oh, okay, is there anything else that I need to know about this?
Okay,
Or
awesome.
like,
Thank you.
let me get at the guts of that method. Yeah, great question. Okay, cool. And then the sort of like last one that I want to go over in detail is our class scope. And this is going to be from class to end. And really the reason that I want to even mention class scope is because of instance variables. So the thing about class scope is instance variables, let's see, yeah, instance variables are available throughout. Is that how you spell throughout? I think so. So let me grab this other example here. So when we have an instance variable, this instance variable at name is now available to us throughout this class. So we can use it in any other method inside this class without having to re-declare it. So these instance variables live in our class scope and are available inside any methods because our methods can access any methods. No, just kidding. Reverse. Our instance variables are available within any method in our class scope. Yeah, there we all throughout. So this is like any method within the class scope. Okay, cool. Then the last thing that I wanted to mention is, and I heard a few groups talk about this, is this idea of like local, and what does local even mean? So when we talk about instance variables, this is very specific. Instance variables are available throughout a class in any method inside this class. When we talk about local variables, this idea of what is local is a little more, is a little harder to wrap our minds around. So when we talk about local, we talk about what we mean is the scope that we are currently in. So in this example, I have a local variable person equals person.new here. This local variable is local to our global scope. The localness of this variable is global. It's like in the neighborhood of global. If I have a variable defined in a method, like hi equals hello, this local variable, its localness is method scope. Okay, so local is like relative to where you are in this like scope universe. Okay. All right, cool. Do we have any questions? Any questions about this? Anything that you are hoping I would touch on and didn't? Yeah, Jake.
So I'm not even sure if I'm asking this question in the right way,
That's okay.
but I understand that like obviously things are essentially boxed, and the lower something is, the higher up the box is, it has access to it. So it flows in one direction, but it doesn't flow back down the other way. Is there something that's like, it's in that chain, but it's too far up to be seen, or it doesn't matter, it flows infinitely in one direction as long as like they're encased?
Yeah, I would say very few things flow infinitely. Most things have a scope of either like I'm within this box or I can reach one box out.
That was my question. So it can only reach one box out. So if it's like,
Generally, yes.
okay, so like when you have defined greeting, hi is equal to hello, that could look one scope up to person, but it couldn't, like if person was encased in something else, it couldn't then go up above that. Again, I don't even know if I'm asking the question in the right way.
No, it's a great question. I think you're asking it in the right way. The answer is, to be honest, I don't know. And I think that it's a really good question that highlights that this idea of scope is not something that you're going to be an expert at. You're not going to know every single thing about it, but you are going to be able to say, like, when I get this error that's like undefined variable or method, how can I start to debug that? And I can start by thinking about the scope.
Okay.
Yeah, so good question. I don't know the answer in that specific instance, but I will say, like, generally the things that we work with, block scope, method scope, you're going to be looking like one level out.
So when we're building things, try to build things that like if I need something, it's never more than one level away from it.
I think that's fair to say.
Okay.
Genevieve and then Doug.
So I just want to clarify. So instance variables can only exist in a class.
In mod 1, we will only use instance variables inside of a class.
Okay. So double-edged sword, got it. And so that, but a class can contain both local and instance variables.
Yes.
Okay.
Doug?
I was going to ask basically the same thing. So
Okay.
answer two questions at once.
Awesome. All right. Let's see. Do I have is a mic here? Is there a mic in the house? Okay, great. I apologize, Mike. I went over into your time. So I will let you, I'm going to stop this recording if I can.
Yeah, just pass me host and